The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, casting shadows that danced across the study walls like memories trying to escape the dark. Outside, snow fell in thick silence over the Montana ranch, the kind of snow that buried secrets and truths alike. Nathan Whitecloud sat in his leather chair, the one with the worn armrests where his hands had rested for 30 years, and watched his grandson turn the yellowed pages of a journal that should have stayed buried. Thomas was 15, the age when boys started asking questions their fathers couldn't answer, the age when the weight of family history began to press down on young shoulders. He looked up from the journal, his eyes catching the firelight, and Nathan saw in that gaze something he recognized: the hunger to understand, the need to know why the old man in the chair never spoke about certain things, never mentioned certain names. "Grandpa," Thomas said, his voice still carrying the crack of adolescence, "why don't you ever talk about my father's real parents?" Nathan reached for the whiskey bottle on the side table. Old Crow, 1920 vintage. He'd been saving it for 34 years, waiting for a moment that felt important enough. This was that moment. He poured 2 fingers into a crystal glass, the amber liquid catching the light like captured sunlight. He didn't drink, not yet, just held it, feeling its weight. "Some stories," Nathan said, his voice carrying the gravel of 73 years, "only make sense when you're old enough to understand that the world ain't black and white. It's all shades of gray, boy, every damn inch of it." Thomas closed the journal carefully, as if it might crumble to dust. The leather binding was cracked, the pages brittle with age. On the cover, burned into the leather with a hot iron, were the initials D.C. "Whose journal is this?" "Your great-uncle's, Daniel Cross. He was a lieutenant in the Army back when I was just a fool kid who thought following orders made you a man." Nathan stood his knees, protesting the movement, and walked to the window. The snow was coming down harder now, erasing the fence lines, the barn, everything that marked the edges of his world. "You asked why I don't talk about your father's parents. It's because that story starts with blood, and it don't end clean." He turned back to Thomas, and in the firelight, the old man's face showed every scar, every regret, every choice that had carved lines into his weathered skin. "It starts in 1909. I was 28 years old, your age plus 13 years. I'd been in the cavalry for 3 years, stationed in Dakota Territory. It was February. Cold, like you can't imagine. The kind of cold that makes your breath freeze in your lungs." Nathan's hand moved to the mantel, where a cavalry whistle hung on a leather cord. He took it down, turned it over in his fingers. The brass was tarnished, dark with age, but when he held it up to the light, you could still see the engraving. R.W., it read, "For my son when he's ready." "My father gave me this, Robert Whitecloud. He was a tribal liaison, worked between the Army and the Lakota, tried to keep peace when there wasn't any to be had." Nathan's voice dropped lower, almost to a whisper. "He died the night I learned that following orders and doing right ain't always the same thing." The whistle caught the firelight, and, for just a moment, Thomas could swear he saw something dark on its surface. Something that might have been blood once upon a time. "What happened, Grandpa?" Nathan closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was younger, harder, filled with a pain that 30 years hadn't softened. "Canyon Creek happened. The transition was seamless, the way memory always is. One moment Nathan was standing in his study in 1954, and the next he was 28 years old again, standing in snow that came up to his knees, his Springfield rifle heavy in his hands, watching his breath turn to frost in the darkness. February 14th, 1909. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like ice chips. The temperature had dropped to 15 below zero. Nathan could feel his fingers going numb inside his gloves. Around him, 40 men from the 7th Cavalry moved through the snow in silence. Their horses left a mile back because Captain Silas Blackwood wanted this done quiet. The village was small, maybe 20 teepees set in a depression near the creek where the wind couldn't reach. Smoke rose from the fire holes, thin gray columns that disappeared into the black sky. Nathan could smell it, pine smoke and cooking meat, the smell of people living their lives unaware that death was walking toward them through the snow. Blackwood raised his hand. The column stopped. Nathan could see the captain's face in the starlight, hard and cold as the frozen ground beneath their boots. Blackwood was 42 years old, a veteran of the Indian Wars, a man who wore his medals like armor and his rank like a weapon. "Pacification orders," Blackwood said, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying clearly in the frozen air. "Intelligence reports hostile activity, weapons cache, known insurgents." He paused, his eyes scanning the men. "No survivors. Clean sweep. We go in on my signal. Illuminate the target and advance." "Understood." Nathan felt something twist in his gut. He'd been on pacification missions before. They were usually about rounding up runaways, confiscating weapons, making a show of force. But no survivors. That wasn't pacification. That was something else. Beside him, a young sergeant named Elias Grant shifted his weight. Grant was 30 years old, lean and quiet, the kind of soldier who followed orders without question. He caught Nathan's eye and shrugged. Orders were orders. Nathan looked back at the village. In one of those teepees, families were sleeping. Children, old people. His father had told him stories about how the army used to do things back in the old days, before there were rules, before anyone pretended to care about doing it right. A figure emerged from the darkness to Nathan's left, on horseback, riding hard snow, flying from the horse's hooves. Nathan recognized the rider instantly. Robert Whitecloud, his father still wearing his tribal liaison sash, riding straight toward the village. "No," Nathan whispered. "No, no, no." Robert was shouting in Lakota, "Inyanka, Inyanka. Run, run." His voice carried across the snow, shattering the silence, and lights started appearing in the teepees as people woke. Blackwood's face went rigid. "Fire." The illuminating shells went up first, 3 of them, arcing into the sky and exploding above the village in bursts of white phosphorus that turned night into day. In that terrible light, Nathan saw his father clearly. Robert was 50 yards from the village, still shouting, and then Blackwood raised his service revolver and fired. The shot was clean, professional. Robert Whitecloud pitched sideways off his horse and hit the snow and didn't move. "Advance," Blackwood said. The world exploded into chaos, rifles firing the Springfield's distinctive crack, echoing across the frozen landscape, people running from the teepees, screaming, falling. Nathan stood frozen, watching his father's body in the snow, the red spreading around him like a blooming flower. Grant grabbed his arm. "Move, Whitecloud, that's an order." Nathan moved, not forward, sideways, toward his father. He ran through the snow, his rifle forgotten, and dropped to his knees beside Robert. His father's eyes were open, looking up at the stars, and there was so much blood. "Nikte sni," Robert whispered. The words bubbled with blood. "Don't die." His hand gripped Nathan's wrist, and Nathan felt something pressed into his palm. The whistle. "Nikte sni." Then Robert's eyes went distant, and Nathan was alone in the snow holding his father's whistle, while behind him the village burned. He didn't know how long he knelt there. Could have been seconds. Could have been hours. But at some point he became aware of movement in the root cellar of a collapsed tipi. A girl, maybe 17, pregnant and terrified, trying to hide in the frozen earth. Nathan looked at her, looked at Blackwood standing 50 feet away, methodically directing the burning, looked at the whistle in his hand. He made a choice. He helped the girl out of the cellar, wrapped her in his coat, and pointed her toward the trees. "Run," he said in Lakota, the only word he knew. "Inyanka." She ran. Nathan watched her disappear into the darkness, and then he ran too, away from the burning village, away from Blackwood's orders, away from everything that had made him a soldier. He didn't stop running until dawn. The scene dissolved like smoke, and Nathan was back in his study. Thomas staring at him with wide eyes. The old man's hands were shaking. He took a drink of the whiskey, finally let it burn down his throat. "I was labeled a deserter," Nathan said. Court-martial orders signed the next day, but I'd already gone to ground, disappeared into the territories, lived rough for 3 years. He set the glass down carefully. Your father, Kai, he was born 9 months after that night. His mother was that girl I helped. Little Sparrow, they called her. She died giving birth to him, bled out in an abandoned trapper shack alone while I was hiding like a coward 50 miles away. You didn't know, Thomas said. Didn't matter. I should have done more. Should have fought back harder. Should have. Nathan shook his head. But I didn't. So I carried that weight. Carried it for 15 years until one day in November 1924 it all came back. He turned back to the window. The snow was letting up, revealing the barn, the fence line, the world coming back into focus. That was the year I learned you can't outrun your debts. The year everything I'd buried came crawling back up out of the ground. The year Marshal Elias Grant came riding up to my ranch with a warrant in his pocket and a guilty look in his eyes. Because Grant was there too that night at Canyon Creek. And he'd been carrying his own weight all those years. Nathan picked up the journal Daniel Cross had kept, the one with the secrets that should have stayed buried. This is where the real story starts, boy. November 1924. The coldest damn winter I ever lived through, and I've lived through 73 of them. The cold didn't knock. It came through the floorboards like it owned the place. Nathan Whitecloud stood barefoot in the middle of his kitchen, the worn wooden planks freezing against his soles, holding a yellow telegram that would bury everything he'd built. The paper crinkled softly as he tightened his grip. 30 days, $500. Final notice. He hadn't seen $500 in one place since before the war, not the recent one. The one before that, when men still fought with bayonets and gas masks and believed the politicians when they said it would all be over by Christmas. The hearth behind him popped, but the fire couldn't chase the frost from his bones. His father's boots still sat by the door untouched since that night, 15 years ago, like they were waiting for Robert to return and undo all this. Nathan folded the telegram, slid it into his coat pocket, and walked to the front porch. The wind bit through his shirt like broken glass. Dakota didn't offer kindness in November, not to anyone, and especially not to men who carried the kind of history he did. He looked out across the valley. Snow clung to the fence line like pale hands reaching for something they couldn't hold. His land, his father's land. 640 acres, every fence post dug by hand, every well stone by stone. And now some paper from a federal office in Bismarck said none of it mattered. He stepped off the porch and into the snow. The first fence line was half buried already, though he'd fixed it 2 weeks ago. He walked the perimeter checking for breaks. It was what his father used to do when trouble weighed too heavy. Keep moving. Fix what you can. Ignore what you can't. But this time, nothing would be fixed with hammer and wire. They wanted the land. That much was clear. The timing of the notice, the sudden inflation of the debt, the surveying markers that had appeared near the creek. Nathan wasn't a fool. The railroad was coming, and his land sat square on the planned junction. He'd heard whispers in town. Too much land for one man, they said, especially a half-breed who walks like a soldier and talks like he's waiting for someone to shoot first. He stopped at the far gate and leaned on the fence, breathing hard through his nose. The air smelled like snow and dry rot. His hands ran along the top rail fingers, dragging over initials carved deep in the wood. R.W. they read. Robert Whitecloud. Every fence post remembers a name his father used to say, and none of them forget betrayal. The sound of hooves on frozen ground made him turn. 3 riders cresting the hill near the tree line, shadows against the snow, not town folk, not ranch hands. These men rode with purpose, wore dark coats, and carried themselves with the stiffness of authority. Nathan didn't move. He stood tall and watched. The led horse slowed. One of the riders raised a hand. Might have been a friendly gesture, but it didn't matter. There were only a few reasons federal men rode this far north, and none of them ended with handshakes. He walked back to the porch with measured steps slower than his heart wanted. Inside, he grabbed the Colt from the mantel. The 1873 Peacemaker, his father's service weapon polished and loaded, and never fired since that night. He checked the chambers, then tucked it into his coat, not to start anything, just in case. By the time he stepped back onto the porch, the riders were close enough to recognize. The one in front was Marshal Elias Grant. Nathan remembered him from the old days back when uniforms were blue and bleeding in the name of duty felt like something noble. Grant had aged like wood left out in the sun, cracked but still solid. The other two were younger, one clean-shaven with soft hands and expensive gloves. The other had the bored look of a clerk who'd never had to clean blood off his boots. "Nathan Whitecloud," Grant called out, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "You're not lost," Nathan replied evenly, "so I guess you came to deliver something." Grant dismounted slowly, like a man who'd been in the saddle too long. "I've got a federal warrant." Nathan's jaw flexed. "For what?" "Desertion, obstruction of military justice, related to the Canyon Creek incident." Grant paused, dated 15 years back. Silence fell like snow, heavy and suffocating. Nathan exhaled through his nose, watching his breath turn to frost. "That name still gets thrown around," Grant nodded grimly. "It's alive again, thanks to someone with stars on his shoulder and something to prove." Nathan didn't answer, not yet. His mind was already pushing through years of silence, trying to find the one moment where all this started to unravel. Canyon Creek, the orders, the ride through the dark, the screams. He thought it was over. He thought time would bury it. "I'm not hiding," he said finally. "Never said you were. I've been right here, same name, same land, same ghosts." The younger agent stepped forward with iron cuffs in hand. Nathan eyed him, but didn't move. "Can I put on a coat?" he asked. "You got 30 seconds, Grant said, "and don't make me regret trusting you." Nathan turned and stepped inside. The fire had almost died. In its glow, the house looked smaller than he remembered. As he reached for his coat, something outside changed. Not the wind, not the air. The silence shifted. He pulled the revolver slowly and stepped to the side window. Out past the fence where the frost glistened white, two figures moved through the snow. A woman, long black hair tangled in the wind, a child clutching her side. And behind them, 4 riders in cavalry blue rifles drawn closing in like wolves. Nathan's breath caught, not because of fear, because of recognition, not of faces, but of the look in the woman's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen 15 years ago, right before the sky at Canyon Creek turned red. He opened the door, stepped out onto the porch, and said to Grant, "You've got your past, but mine's coming down that hill." Nathan didn't wait for permission. He stepped off the porch and into the snow boots, cracking the crust of ice that had formed overnight. Marshal Grant called after him, but Nathan didn't look back. The woman and child were too far from shelter, and the soldiers riding down from the ridge weren't aiming to talk. The woman held the boy close, one arm around his shoulders, the other bracing against the wind. Her hair whipped in black ribbons across her face. The child was small, maybe 9, maybe less, and clung to her, half buried in the folds of her coat. The way she moved wasn't random. It was calculated, deliberate. Survival, not panic. 4 cavalrymen approached from the pines, rifles drawn, uniforms crisp despite the snow. The lead rider raised a hand. "Step aside, sir. This doesn't concern you." Nathan kept walking. The wind tore through his coat, but his blood was warm now. Too warm. He stopped 20 yards from the woman and faced the riders. "This is private land," he said, voice loud but even. "You want something, state your business." The sergeant pulled up his hoarse annoyance, tightening his jaw. "Army matter. Escaped fugitives. Stand aside." "What charges?" Nathan asked. The second soldier barked, "2 federal guards dead at Fort Randall. These 2 slipped the reservation 6 weeks ago and haven't stopped running." The boy peered up from beneath his mother's arm, eyes wild but sharp. He didn't cry, didn't move, just watched Nathan with an intensity that felt familiar. Nathan turned to the woman. Her face was narrow-lined by cold and hardship. She didn't speak yet, just watched him measuring. Behind him, Grant had followed, coat-flapping hand resting near his holster. "You don't need to get involved in this, Nathan," Grant said. "Your situation's bad enough." Nathan didn't flinch. "Maybe. But some situations get worse if no one does a damn thing." The woman shifted, straightened. She raised her hand slowly, palms open. "We didn't kill anyone," she said, voice clear, despite the wind. "They tried to take my nephew in the middle of the night, said he needed proper Christian guardianship. When I said no, they drew weapons." Grant stiffened. One of the soldiers muttered something under his breath. Nathan stepped slightly in front of her. "You got proof they're guilty?" he asked. "We've got orders," the sergeant barked. "They match the descriptions." "That's enough." Nathan's jaw locked. He looked back at the boy, mixed features, Lakota eyes, lighter skin, a face that wouldn't belong anywhere. He knew what that kind of face meant, what it cost. The woman spoke again. "My name is Maya Redfeather. This is Kai. His mother, my cousin, was killed the day he was born. His father wore your uniform." The silence that followed was brutal. Grant shifted uncomfortably. The agents behind him looked anywhere but at Nathan. Nathan's voice came slow. "Canyon Creek." Maya nodded once. "He was conceived days before. She was 17. The boy looked down, his cheeks pink with cold and shame that wasn't his to carry. Nathan turned back to the soldiers. "They're not going with you." The sergeant barked a laugh. "You planning to start another war over some half-blood orphan?" Nathan's revolver was out before the man could blink. He didn't aim it, just let it sit in his hand, easy and familiar. "You don't want to test how many wars I've still got in me," he said. Grant stepped between them. "God damn it, Nathan. Think." "I am." He looked at the boy again, saw himself. Different child, same eyes, same silence. He remembered the way his own mother had kept him out of sight for years. Not white enough for the settlers, not Lakota enough for the tribe, not anything enough for anyone. Grant raised his hands. "Let's calm this down. Let's all take a breath." The sergeant spat in the snow. "They're murderers." "Then prove it," Nathan snapped. "In court, with evidence, not with bullets and winter graves." The wind shifted again. Clouds thickened on the horizon. Snow was coming heavier this time. The second cavalryman stepped down from his horse, resting a hand on the butt of his rifle. Maya stepped forward too, shielding Kai with her body. And that's when Nathan saw it. An old scar across her collarbone, half hidden by the edge of her coat. A burn mark. Not fresh, years old. The kind left by shackles, not accident. He didn't ask. Didn't need to. One of the federal agents muttered, "If death is coming for us, let it come hungry." The words hung in the air like smoke. Nathan holstered his revolver, but didn't relax. "You can tell your commanding officer," he said slowly, "that anyone who steps foot on this land with a rifle pointed at a child is trespassing, and I don't take kindly to trespassers." Grant exhaled through his nose. "You just made this harder than it had to be." Nathan nodded. "Good." Maya didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The way she laid her hand on Kai's shoulder said enough. The soldiers didn't shoot. Not yet. Maybe they weren't sure who they were hunting anymore. After a beat, they turned their horses and pulled back toward the ridge. Grant stayed behind, rubbing a hand over his face. "This isn't going away, Nathan. General Blackwood's on his way. You remember him." Nathan's eyes hardened. "I remember what he did. He wants closure. He'll get something." Grant looked between Maya, the boy, and Nathan. "You just chose a side. Hope you're ready to bleed for it." Nathan turned away. "I've been bleeding for 15 years. As they walked back to the house, Maya finally broke the quiet. "You didn't ask why we came here." Nathan glanced at her. "Didn't need to. We came for the same reason everyone runs in winter." "What reason's that?" He looked out at the falling snow, already beginning to blanket the tracks they left in the yard. "Because the tracks vanish quicker than the truth." Maya held his gaze. "That man coming. Blackwood. He won't stop." I know, Nathan said. That's why I need to start. Inside, the fire had died down to embers. Kai stood beside the hearth and began gathering kindling with hands that knew exactly what to do. Not asking. Just acting. Nathan watched him for a moment, then turned to Maya. He's seen too much. So have you. Nathan nodded. That's why we don't let him carry it alone. She touched her collarbone without thinking. They'll come back. I hope they do, he said. Outside, the wind howled louder, whipping around the corners of the house like a warning, and far in the distance on the southern trail a glint of brass caught the last light of day. A new rider, not the law, not cavalry. Something worse. Nathan opened the door before the rider dismounted. The man's silhouette loomed at the edge of the yard hat, low overcoat streaked with road dust and frost. He sat his horse like he hadn't left the saddle in days, spine-stiff expression unreadable in the dimming light. But Nathan recognized the way he held himself, military but not clean, hardened by time like the uniform had clung to him long after he stopped wearing it. Marshal Grant stepped up beside Nathan on the porch. You know him. Nathan didn't answer. The rider swung down slowly. His spurs didn't jingle. They groaned. He walked into the yard with the deliberate pace of a man who knew this place, who had stood here once before and walked away without bleeding. A man who didn't expect to be questioned, only obeyed. The boy Kai peeked out from behind the window curtain. Maya stood behind him, hand resting on his shoulder. Grant muttered, "Well, I'll be damned." Nathan finally spoke, voice low but clear. "I thought they buried you with your medals." The man stepped closer. Cold wind followed him like a curse. "I bury men," he said. "I don't join them." General Silas Blackwood, the man who gave the order at Canyon Creek, the man who turned one night of smoke and screaming into 15 years of silence and shame. He stopped at the edge of the porch, his pale blue eyes scanning the yard, the house, the woman behind the glass. He didn't flinch at the rifle barrel leaning against the doorframe, didn't glance at Grant, his attention fixed only on Nathan. "You never changed," Blackwood said, "still wearing guilt like it's a medal." "You call it treason. I call it the only thing I've ever done right." Grant stepped between them. "General, we already made contact. The fugitives are in custody under civilian protection." Blackwood scoffed. "That's not how this works. The boy and the woman are material witnesses in a federal investigation. They're military fugitives, not your concern." Nathan bristled. "They've been hunted across 2 states. You call that an investigation? I call it justice," Blackwood said, climbing the first porch step. "Or what passes for it in this territory." Nathan didn't back down. "What you call justice I remember as fire, screams, children torn apart because you couldn't wait to make a name for yourself." Blackwood smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You never did understand how duty works. Still don't." He turned slightly, finally acknowledging Grant. "Marshal, I have full authorization to transport the woman and the boy to Fort Lincoln. Orders signed in Washington." "I've seen those orders," Grant replied. "They're vague. And frankly, I don't trust the reason behind them." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "You're either with me, Marshal, or you're standing in the way of federal law." "I'm standing in front of a house with 2 people inside who haven't been proven guilty of a damn thing," Grant said. The wind picked up scattering dry snow across the porch like ash. Nathan saw it then, the flicker of something ugly behind Blackwood's polished surface. Not rage, not even impatience, desperation. Blackwood wasn't just here to collect witnesses, he was here to erase them. "Why now?" Nathan asked. "Why chase this boy across a territory when you ignored 100 worse things for years?" Blackwood didn't blink. "Because loose ends have a way of fraying everything." Behind him, 2 more riders emerged from the woods, silent, watching. Officers, Blackwood's men, not cavalry, hand-picked. Maya stepped onto the porch, silent as the wind. "He knows," she said quietly. Blackwood turned to her, eyebrow raised. "Kai's father," she said. "He worked for you, kept records, and you killed him for it." Nathan looked at Blackwood sharply, but the general's face stayed still. Not even a twitch. "He died in a training accident," Blackwood said. If there were records, they died with him. Grant stepped back suddenly, uneasy. Did they? Maya pulled a small bundle from inside her coat, cloth-wrapped, weathered. She held it up. My nephew carries every word, she said. Names, orders, letters, enough to sink 10 careers. Blackwood's jaw tightened. You think ink on paper will change what this country wants? Nathan stepped forward. No, but it might change what this country tolerates. Silence fell over the porch. Blackwood stared at the bundle. His face remained carved from stone, but something trembled in his gloved hand. Then, in a move so fast it almost fooled the wind, Blackwood reached for his coat. Grant shouted, "Don't!" But Nathan was faster. His revolver cleared leather and cocked. Blackwood froze hand inches from the inside of his jacket. "Tell your men to back off," Nathan said. "Now!" Blackwood's voice dropped to a hiss. "You're threatening a federal officer. I'm pointing a gun at the man who murdered a village and called it strategy." Blackwood didn't blink. "You're not brave, Nathan, just unfinished." He lowered his hand slowly. Nathan didn't lower his gun. "We're not finished," Blackwood said. "I'll be back with more paper, with more men. And when I come through that gate next time, I won't be asking." "Good," Nathan said. "I'm done answering." Blackwood turned and walked away. His men followed silent as ghosts. Grant watched them go, then rubbed his temples. "You just bought us a war." Nathan holstered the gun. "No, he already started it. We just finally stopped pretending." Maya stood beside him, eyes locked on the trees. "You know what happens next." Nathan nodded. "Yeah, they come back. And next time they won't knock." He looked at Grant. "I need time. I need the boy safe. And I need you to pick a side." Grant didn't answer right away, but he didn't leave either. Inside, Kai sat cross-legged by the hearth, a journal open across his knees. He read slowly, mouthing the words. Names, places, dates. He didn't look up when the wind slammed against the house again, didn't flinch. The fire flared, catching stronger, casting shadows across the walls like echoes of old ghosts finally stirring awake. And in the dark beyond the trees, the general kept riding, back to Fort Lincoln, back to sharpen the knife. The wind didn't sleep that night. It clawed at the windows like an animal trapped outside, howling low and constant. The shutters groaned on their hinges, and the fire inside hissed every time the draft found a crack. But the people in that house were quieter than the storm. Nathan sat at the table, eyes fixed on the worn edge of a whiskey glass he hadn't touched in years. Maya stood behind him, arms crossed, her shawl pulled tight. Kai sat on the floor nearby, curled with the journal on his lap, silent but alert, always listening, even when pretending not to. "I knew he'd come eventually," Nathan said, not looking up. "I just didn't think he'd still be so damn proud of it." "Blackwood's not chasing justice," Maya said. "He's chasing a razor." Nathan finally looked at her. "You said the boy's father had documents, records of what happened." She nodded. "Letters, reports, names, places, hidden in plain sight." "Then why come here?" Maya hesitated. The fire popped. "I wasn't supposed to," she said. "I had family in Colorado. Safer routes, quiet towns. But she looked toward Kai. "He kept dreaming about this place, a house on a ridge, fences like bones, a man with sad eyes and an old scar on his hand." Nathan glanced down at his own wrist, faint, puckered from shrapnel. "Dreams," he muttered. "He's had them since he was 5, she said. "Said he needed to find the man in the snow, the one who never ran." He couldn't answer that. Didn't know how. Maya stepped closer. "He's seen more than any child should. You know what that does." Nathan's voice dropped. "Yeah, I do." She moved to the hearth, crouched, fed the fire a pine log. The light flickered over her face, softening it, but not enough to hide the years. "My cousin, his mother. She was 17 when they came to the village." Maya said, her voice steady but brittle. "Soldiers said they were searching for weapons. Found none. Took everything anyway." Nathan didn't breathe. "She screamed his name," Maya went on. "The white soldier, not Blackwood, someone younger, brown hair, bad tattoo on his left arm. She looked at him fierce now. He was Kai's father. Nathan swallowed. What happened to her? Bled out during childbirth, alone in a shack that used to be a schoolhouse. He pressed his hands flat against the table to keep them from shaking. Why didn't you leave sooner? I tried, but they kept moving us. New reservations, new restrictions. Then I found the letters, buried under a floorboard in the house where she died. His father had written them. Not to the army, not to the press, to his son. Kai looked up at that. His face didn't change, but his eyes caught the firelight in a way that felt older than he should have been. Letters, Nathan said. Maya nodded. Dozens, apologies, confessions, coordinates. He knew what Blackwood was doing, tried to gather evidence, said he wanted to protect something pure. Nathan stood. He couldn't sit anymore. So he was a whistleblower, he muttered, and Blackwood made sure he didn't live long enough to be heard. Maya reached into her satchel and pulled out a bundle wrapped in hide. She laid it on the table and slowly unwrapped it. Inside were pages, some torn from official ledgers, others handwritten on military stationery. Blood-stained, weather-worn, real. Nathan picked up one. His name was on it. Canyon Creek. Orders to encircle, to fire on movement, to leave no survivors. I never saw this, he whispered. You weren't supposed to, Maya said. Nathan ran a hand over his face. They don't hunt people, he said quietly. They hunt memory. He looked at her, and this memory could burn them all. Maya didn't smile, but her silence said she agreed. Behind them, Kai stood slowly and crossed to the table. He took one-page eyes scanning. Who's Lieutenant Kessler? He asked. Nathan stiffened. He was the liaison between Blackwood and the local rail company. Disappeared 2 weeks after the massacre. I have a letter from him, Kai said. He pulled another sheet from the bundle. It was different, more formal, written in precise cursive. Nathan read aloud. The shipment is confirmed. Timber markers placed. The Garrett land is to be seized before winter. Tell no one. Burn this. His hands clenched the page. That's my father's name, he said. Maya's eyes narrowed. He was a target. Nathan nodded. He spoke up, questioned Blackwood. They buried him in a fake tax debt and let pneumonia do the rest. The fire snapped behind them. Grant re-entered the house dusted with snow. They've set camp a mile south, 2 tents. 4 more riders arrived an hour ago. Nathan looked up. They'll come tonight. Grant nodded. Or wait till dawn. Either way, they're not backing off. Nathan looked at the documents again. If we give them the boy, will they leave? No, Maya said flatly. They'll take him. Then they'll kill us and say we shot first. Nathan met Grant's eyes. What would you do? The marshal hesitated. Run, he said. And make damn sure you have someone who will talk once you're gone. No, Nathan said. We stop running here. Maya nodded slowly. Then we prepare. Kai spoke up, voice steady. I can hide the papers where they won't find them. Grant looked at him surprised. Where? The boy gave a half smile. In the hollow post by the east gate, the one with initials on it. Nathan's brow furrowed. How do you know about that? I saw it in a dream. Grant exhaled. You believe in fate. Nathan looked down at the child holding the history of their sins. Not until today. Outside the wind shifted. The snow began again, soft at first, then heavier. Tomorrow nothing would be the same. The fire had burned down to ash and ember when Thomas spoke again, breaking the silence that had settled over the study like fresh snow. His grandfather stood at the window, one hand pressed against the cold glass, watching the storm outside grow stronger. Marshal Grant died. Thomas asked, his voice small in the darkness. Nathan nodded slowly, didn't turn around. Man saved my life in France, in the trenches at Belleau Wood. Pulled me out of a gas cloud when my mask cracked. I owed him. He walked back to the desk, poured another measure of whiskey into the glass he'd been ignoring. This time he poured 2, slid one across the polished wood toward Thomas. You're 15, old enough to understand that some debts get paid in blood. Thomas looked at the glass but didn't touch it. Nathan picked up his own, held it to the firelight. The amber liquid glowed like captured sunset. "This bottle," Nathan said. "Old Crow 1920. I bought it the day Grant died. Been saving it for 34 years, waiting for the right moment to open it." He took a drink, let it burn. Figured tonight was that moment. He set the glass down carefully, like it might shatter if handled wrong. Grant was a complicated man, carried guilt the way some men carry pocket watches, always checking it, always aware of its weight. But in the end, he did what mattered. Nathan returned to his chair, settled into the worn leather with a sigh that carried 73 years of living. November 16th, 1924. That's when everything went to hell. We'd made a plan the night before. Maya and Kai would go west with Grant, head for Montana, where Maya had people. I'd go north to Denver, meet the reporter Fletcher had sent. Crow would stay at the ranch, make them think nothing had changed. He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice had that quality it got when memory took over, when the past became more real than the present. They left at dawn. I watched them ride out 3 figures against the snow, Grant on his bay gelding, Maya on a paint mare, Kai on a little pony that seemed too small for the journey ahead. I stood on that porch and watched until they disappeared over the ridge. Had a feeling I'd never see Grant alive again. Hate being right about things like that. The scene shifted the way it always did when Nathan told these stories. The study dissolved, replaced by winter landscape and the sound of horses moving through deep snow. Snakejaw Pass earned its name honestly. The canyon wound through the hills like a serpent's spine, narrow and treacherous, with walls of shale and limestone rising 150 feet on either side. There were only 2 ways through it, north or south, no side exits, no escape routes. Just 400 yards of killing ground where the wind funneled through like a scream trapped in stone. Maya led the way, her paint mare picking careful steps through snow that came up to the horse's knees. Behind her, Kai sat straight in his saddle, despite the cold, his small hands gripping the reins with the kind of determination that came from knowing there was no going back. Grant brought up the rear, his Winchester rifle resting across his saddle eyes, constantly scanning the ridgeline above. The time was 11:30 in the morning. The sky had turned the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of more snow. The temperature had dropped to 5 below zero, and their breath came out in clouds that hung in the still air before dissipating. Grant pulled his horse alongside Maya's. "Don't like this," he said, voice low. "Too quiet, too narrow. If I was setting up an ambush, this is where I'd do it." Maya glanced at the walls rising around them. "Can we go around? Add 6 hours, maybe more in this snow, and Kai's already shivering." She looked back at the boy. He was trying to hide it, but his shoulders shook with cold despite the layers of clothing they'd wrapped him in. She made her decision. "We go through, but fast." They spurred their horses forward, and that's when the first shot rang out. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, multiplying, making it impossible to tell where it came from. Grant's horse screamed and went down a bullet through its neck. The animal hit the snow hard, and Grant was thrown clear landing in a drift that probably saved his ribs from breaking. "Contact!" he shouted, already rolling toward cover. "Get to the rocks!" More shots. Maya grabbed Kai's reins and pulled both horses toward a cluster of boulders on the east side of the pass. A bullet sparked off stone 6 inches from her head, and another punched through her saddle, missing her leg by a hand's width. Kai didn't scream, didn't cry, just held on and trusted his aunt to get them to safety. They made it behind the boulders. Maya practically threw Kai off his horse and pushed him down into the snow. "Stay low," she said. "Don't move unless I tell you." She pulled the Remington Derringer from her coat. 2 shots, .41 caliber. Not much, but it was all she had. Grant was 30 feet away, pinned behind his dead horse, reaching for his Winchester that had slid 15 feet away in the snow. The mercenaries revealed themselves then. 6 men moving down from the ridgeline with the practiced efficiency of professional killers. Not cavalry, not federal agents. These were hired guns, the kind of men who did work that couldn't appear on any official record. The leader was a man named Pike Morrison. Nathan had mentioned him in passing, warned Grant to watch for him. Morrison was tall and lean, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that held no more emotion than a snake's. He'd made his reputation at the Ludlow massacre, shooting strikers and their families. He carried a Springfield rifle and used it with the casual precision of a man who'd killed so many times that it had become boring. "Lay down your weapons," Morrison called out, his voice flat and emotionless. "The woman and the boy come with us. You can ride away, Marshal. We got no quarrel with you." Grant didn't answer. He was calculating distances, angles, chances. His rifle was 15 feet away. His service revolver was in his holster, but he was on his stomach in the snow and couldn't draw without exposing himself. The odds weren't good. Maya fired one shot from her Derringer. The range was too long, the gun too small, but the bullet came close enough that Morrison's men scattered for cover. It bought them maybe 30 seconds. Grant used those seconds. He lunged for his Winchester, and bullets chewed up the snow around him, but somehow none of them found flesh. He grabbed the rifle, rolled back behind the horse, and came up shooting. His first shot took one of the mercenaries in the shoulder. The man spun and went down, screaming. His second shot hit another in the chest, and that man went down silent and permanent. His third shot was suppressive fire meant to keep heads down, while Maya made her move. "There's a crevice," Grant shouted, 20 yards east, in the canyon wall. Get to it." Maya looked where he was pointing. She could see it now, a split in the rock face maybe 18 inches wide, barely enough for a person to squeeze through, but it was their only chance. "What about you?" she called back. "I'll cover. Go." She hesitated, looked at Kai, looked at Grant, looked at that narrow opening in the rock that might lead to freedom or might lead nowhere at all. Grant must have seen the doubt in her eyes, because he turned and looked at her directly. "I'm too big to fit through there anyway. 6'2", 190. That crack's made for smaller folks. Take the boy and go. That's an order." "You're not my officer," Maya said. Grant smiled, and there was something sad and final in it. "No, but I'm asking anyway." More bullets. One punched through the dead horse and exited near Grant's head, showering him with frozen blood. The mercenaries were advancing using the cover of the canyon walls, working their way closer. Maya grabbed Kai's hand. "Run," she said. "Don't look back, don't stop, just run." They ran, low and fast across the open ground, bullets kicking up snow around them. Maya fired her second and last shot from the Derringer, didn't even aim, just wanted noise to make the shooters flinch. They reached the crevice, and Maya pushed Kai through first, his small body disappearing into the darkness between the rocks. She looked back one last time. Grant was standing now, rifle to his shoulder, firing methodically. He'd given up on cover, given up on survival. He was just buying them time with the only currency he had left. Their eyes met across the snow. Grant nodded once. Then Maya squeezed herself into the crevice and was gone. The passage was narrow and dark, the rock walls pressing in from both sides. Maya could hear gunfire echoing behind them, muffled now by stone. She pushed Kai ahead of her, following the thin line of gray light that suggested an exit somewhere ahead. Behind them, in the canyon, Grant had maybe 14 rounds left in his Winchester. He counted them automatically the way soldiers do when they know they're down to the last magazine. The mercenaries were at 40 yards now, then 30. Pike Morrison stood up from behind a rock, completely exposed, confident in his superiority. "You're done, Marshal. Lay it down, and we'll make it quick." Grant thought about that. Thought about Canyon Creek and what he'd done there. Thought about Robert Whitecloud falling in the snow. Thought about 15 years of carrying weight that never got lighter. He reached into his saddlebag with one hand, keeping the rifle pointed at Morrison with the other. His fingers found what they were looking for. 2 sticks of dynamite wrapped together with electrical tape. He'd kept them for clearing stumps, the kind of thing any rancher might carry. The fuse was short, 30 seconds, maybe less, in the cold. "I got something for you," Grant said. He lit the fuse with a match from his coat pocket. The flame caught, started eating its way down the cord. "A message from the dead." Morrison's eyes went wide. "Jesus Christ, you crazy son of a—" Grant threw the dynamite straight at Morrison and dove flat. The explosion was enormous in the confined space of the canyon. The blast wave rolled over Grant like a physical thing, and then the world was nothing but noise and flying rock, and snow turned to steam. When the echoes finally faded, there was only silence. The rockfall had completely blocked the pass. 200 tons of shale and limestone, maybe more, sealing Snakejaw like a cork in a bottle. It would take days to clear, maybe weeks. In the narrow crevice, Maya and Kai felt the explosion as a deep rumble that shook dust from the stone ceiling. Maya knew what it meant. She didn't cry, didn't allow herself that luxury. She just kept moving, pushing Kai ahead of her through the darkness until they emerged on the other side in a parallel gulch that ran west toward the mountains. They stopped there in the cold and the silence. Kai turned to look back at the wall of rock that now separated them from the canyon, from Grant. "He's gone, isn't he?" Kai asked. His voice was small but steady. Maya nodded. She started to turn away, but then she saw something tucked into a crack in the rock near where they'd emerged. An envelope sealed with wax, addressed in Grant's neat handwriting. To Nathan Whitecloud it read. She took it with shaking hands. The envelope was heavy, like it carried more than just paper, like it carried confession. "We keep moving," Maya said. "That's what he bought us, time. We don't waste it." They walked west into the wind, into the storm that was building on the horizon. Behind them, in Snakejaw Pass, Elias Grant lay under 10 feet of rock, having paid the debt he'd carried for 15 years. The frame dissolved, and Thomas found himself back in the study, watching his grandfather's face in the firelight. The old man's eyes were wet, but no tears fell. "What was in the letter?" Thomas asked. Nathan stood, walked to the desk, and pulled out a wooden box from the bottom drawer. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a yellowed envelope. He handed it to Thomas. "Read it," Nathan said, out loud. Grant's words deserved to be spoken. Thomas opened the envelope carefully, unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was precise, almost architectural in its straightness. He began to read. "Nathan, if you're reading this, I paid what I owed, not to you, to God maybe, to the ghosts. February 15, 1909. I was 30 years old, sergeant under Blackwood. He said, guard the south approach, shoot anyone who runs. I did. Robert Whitecloud tried to escape with a girl. I shot him, back of the head. Range 12 feet. He never saw it coming. The girl kept running. I let her. Couldn't shoot twice." Thomas paused, looked at his grandfather. Nathan's face was stone, but his hands gripped the arms of his chair until his knuckles went white. "Keep reading," Nathan said. "France, 1918. You saved me from gas. I figured that balanced the books. It doesn't. Nothing does. I'm doing this for the boy, for Maya, for little Sparrow. But mostly because I'm tired of living like this. You asked me once why I became a marshal. I said to keep order. Truth is, I was trying to arrest my way to redemption. Doesn't work. Tell Kai his mother was brave. Tell Maya I'm sorry it took this long. Grant." Thomas folded the letter carefully, reverently. "He was the one who killed your father." "Yes," Nathan said, "and he was the one who saved Maya and Kai. Both things are true. That's what I meant about the world being gray." He took the letter back, returned it to its box. "I heard the explosion from 10 miles away. I was halfway to Denver when it came rolling across the hills like thunder. I knew what it meant. Knew Grant had done something permanent." Nathan walked back to the window. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, the kind of snow that buried the world in white silence. "I turned my horse around," he said. "Forgot about Denver, forgot about the plan. All I could think was that Maya and Kai were alone out there, and I'd failed another person I should have protected." He turned back to Thomas. "But before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand something about choices. Grant chose to die, not because he was brave though he was, not because he was guilty though he was that too. He chose it because sometimes the only way to balance the books is to remove yourself from the equation." Nathan returned to his chair, picked up the whiskey glass. "I found them 2 hours later. Found Maya and Kai holed up in an old line shack with 3 of Morrison's men circling like wolves getting ready to burn them out." The old man's eyes went distant again, seeing something 30 years gone. "That's when I learned that the hardest killing isn't the kind you do in war. It's the kind you do when you're trying to save someone you love." The line shack sat in a clearing 8 miles west of Snake Jaw Pass, a structure so old it had probably been built before the territories had names. The logs were hand-hewn pine chinked with mud that had cracked and fallen away in places, leaving gaps where the wind came through. One room, 12 feet by 14, one door facing south, 2 windows, one east and one west, both covered now with whatever Maya had been able to drag in front of them. Smoke rose from the stone chimney in a thin gray line. That's what had drawn Nathan's attention from a mile away. Smoke meant fire. Fire meant people. And in this weather, in this place, there was only one reason for people to be here. He approached on foot, leading his horse through the trees. The animal was exhausted foam at its mouth despite the cold, but Nathan had pushed it hard after hearing the explosion. He'd needed to know, needed to find them. He stopped at the tree line, studying the situation. The shack was in the center of the clearing, maybe 60 yards from where he crouched. 3 men circled it at various distances, using rocks and fallen logs for cover. They had rifles, and they were patient, which meant they were professionals. They were gathering wood, building something near the east wall of the shack. A fire. They were going to smoke Maya and Kai out. Nathan reached for his father's whistle, the one he'd carried since that night in 1909. He brought it to his lips and blew 3 short blasts. The sound was thin and reedy, barely audible over the wind, but it carried. It was a signal his father had used. All clear, safe to move. Inside the shack, Maya's head snapped up. She knew that sound. She'd heard it in stories her cousin used to tell, stories about the man who'd tried to save her. She moved to the window, peered through a gap in the boards. Nathan stood at the tree line, visible, now his hand raised. Maya's face showed relief and fear in equal measure. She raised her hand in return, then held up 3 fingers, 3 shooters. Nathan nodded. He'd counted the same. He worked his way around the clearing, using the trees for cover, getting into position. His Winchester held 15 rounds. He'd need to make them count. The first mercenary never saw it coming. Nathan fired from 180 yards, a difficult shot made harder by wind and cold. But the bullet flew true, taking the man high in the shoulder and spinning him around. He went down behind a woodpile, screaming. The other 2 scattered immediately, diving for cover. One of them, a thin man with a drooping mustache, fired back in Nathan's general direction. 5 shots, rapid fire, all of them high or wide. Panic shooting. Nathan worked the lever on his Winchester, chambering a fresh round. The action was stiff in the cold, the metal wanting to stick, but it cycled. He found the thin man in his sights, waited for him to expose himself while reloading. There, shoulder and head visible above a fallen log. Nathan squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked. The thin man jerked backward and fell, his leg suddenly painted red where the bullet had opened his femoral artery. He'd bleed out in minutes. That left one. The third man was smarter, more careful. He was moving through the trees on Nathan's left flank, trying to get an angle. Nathan caught a flash of movement, fired at it, but the bullet hit only bark and wood. Then the man was on him, closer than Nathan expected, much closer. A big Mexican with a knife the size of a small sword, coming in fast and low. Nathan's rifle jammed the action, frozen from the cold and the speed of firing. He dropped it and went for his revolver, but there wasn't time. The Mexican crashed into him, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and snow. The knife came down in a vicious arc, aiming for Nathan's throat. Nathan caught the man's wrist with both hands, holding that blade 6 inches from his face while the Mexican pushed down with all his weight. They struggled there in the snow, grunting and straining breath, coming in gasps. The Mexican was younger, maybe 35, and heavier by 15 pounds. But Nathan had been fighting for survival since before this man was born. Nathan shifted his weight, brought his knee up hard into the Mexican's groin. The man grunted, his grip loosening for just a second. It was enough. Nathan twisted, throwing the Mexican to the side, and went for his belt, where his father's old cavalry saber hung. The blade came free with a hiss of steel on leather. The Mexican rolled to his feet, knife ready, and they circled each other in the snow. The fight was brutal and quick. The Mexican slashed, and Nathan parried, the two blades ringing together in the cold air. Nathan riposted, the saber's point opening a 4-inch gash on the Mexican's forearm. Blood ran red and steaming onto the white snow. The Mexican dropped his knife. Not on purpose. His fingers just stopped working, the tendons cut. He stared at his hand in disbelief, then looked up at Nathan with hate in his eyes. He charged, going for a tackle, trying to use his weight to bring Nathan down. They grappled, rolling across the frozen ground, neither gaining advantage. The Mexican was stronger, but Nathan was meaner. He'd had more practice at this kind of desperate fighting. They rolled near a rock outcropping, and Nathan's hand found a stone the size of his fist. He brought it down on the Mexican's temple, once, twice. The third time, the Mexican stopped struggling. Nathan pushed the body off him and lay there in the snow, gasping for air. His ribs hurt. His shoulder hurt. Everything hurt. Then he heard the crack of a rifle and felt the bullet punch through his left shoulder. The pain was white and hot and immediate. He rolled, scrabbling for cover, and saw the first mercenary, the one he'd shot in the shoulder, propped against the woodpile with his rifle aimed. The man was working the bolt for a second shot when Maya came out of the shack. She had nothing but a fireplace poker, 3 feet of iron rod, but she moved like a avenging spirit across the snow. The mercenary saw her coming, tried to swing his rifle around, but his wounded shoulder made him slow. Maya swung the poker like an axe, connecting with the rifle and knocking it from his hands. Her second swing caught him across the temple. He went down in a heap. Nathan struggled to his feet, his left arm hanging useless blood running hot down his coat. Maya ran to him, her face showing fear for the first time since this whole thing started. "How bad?" she asked. "Clean through," Nathan said through gritted teeth. "No bone, I'll live." She helped him to the shack. Inside, Kai had a small fire going in the hearth, and he'd laid out what passed for medical supplies, torn cloth for bandages, a bottle of whiskey, a knife heating in the fire. "We need to get you to a doctor," Maya said. Nathan shook his head. "No time. That one I knocked out before he went down. He was mumbling something about Blackwood and Denver and cutting off Fletcher." Maya's eyes sharpened. "Fletcher's the reporter. Supposed to be arriving at Union Station today, 3 o'clock. If Blackwood's men are there—" "What time is it now?" Kai asked. Nathan pulled out his pocket watch. The crystal was cracked from the fight, but it still ticked. noon. "Denver's 40 miles, Maya said. "You can't make it." "No, but there's a telegraph post 8 miles from here. Trading post run by old Silas Webb. I can warn Fletcher. Tell him to meet us somewhere else." "You can barely stand," Maya said. "Then help me stand." She did. Got him upright, got him moving. They left the unconscious mercenary tied with rope from the shack's supplies. The dead they left where they fell. There wasn't time for anything else. The journey to the telegraph post was a blur of pain and cold. Nathan remembered his horse, remembered Maya walking beside him, holding his bad arm to keep it from moving, remembered Kai riding behind him, small arms around his waist, keeping him in the saddle when he started to drift. The trading post appeared like a mirage through the snow. Silas Webb came out when he heard the horses, took one look at Nathan's shoulder, and started cursing. "Get him inside, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. What happened to you?" "Need the telegraph," Nathan said. "Federal business." Webb was 65 years old and had been operating telegraph keys for 40 years. He could send Morse code in his sleep. He got Nathan into a chair, wrapped his shoulder tight enough to slow the bleeding, then sat down at his key. "What's the message?" Nathan dictated it through waves of pain. "Fletcher, stop. Avoid Denver Station. Stop ambush. Stop meet Tribune office. Stop White Cloud." Webb's fingers flew over the key, the rapid clicking filling the small room. When he finished, he waited for the acknowledgement. It came quickly. 3 clicks. Message received. "Denver got it," Webb said. "They'll pass it on." Nathan felt relief wash over him. "You're sure?" "40 years, son, I'm sure." What Nathan didn't know, couldn't know, was that 2 miles down the line a man named Sykes was sitting in a maintenance shack with his own telegraph key intercepting every message that went through. Sykes worked for Blackwood, had worked for him since the general had started building his network of informants and fixers. Sykes copied Nathan's message, then sent his own. "Fletcher, stop. Disregard previous. Stop. Meet Union Depot Platform 3. Stop. White Cloud." He used official Western Union letterhead, made it look legitimate. Fletcher in his hotel room in Denver received both messages. The second one looked more official. He believed it. Meanwhile, at Union Station, men were waiting. Not cavalry, not federal agents, just men with guns and instructions to make sure a certain reporter never filed his story. But that was in Denver, and Nathan was still 8 miles away from anywhere that mattered. Maya got him back on his horse, and they rode west, away from the telegraph post, away from Snake Jaw Pass, toward the mountains that rose like broken teeth against the sky. "We need to cross Devil's Spine," Nathan said. His voice was weaker now, the blood loss catching up to him. "Only way to reach the rail line, only way to get to Denver in time." Maya looked at the mountains. Devil's Spine was visible even from here, a ridge of rock that connected 2 peaks. The trail across it was narrow, dangerous in good weather, and potentially suicidal in a snowstorm. "There's got to be another way," she said. "Not one that gets us there before Blackwood's men kill Fletcher." Kai spoke up from behind Nathan. "The papers. They're in my coat. If something happens to us, Fletcher needs them." Nathan looked back at the boy. 9 years old and already talking about his own death, with the casual acceptance of someone 3 times his age, it broke something in Nathan's heart. "Nothing's going to happen to you," Nathan said. "I promise." It was a promise he hoped he could keep. They reached Devil's Spine as the sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon. The trail was exactly as bad as Nathan remembered, 3 feet wide in places, 4 in others, with a drop on the eastern side that went down 200 feet or more. The rope bridge that crossed the deepest part of the gorge swayed in the wind, the boards cracked and weathered from 20 years of neglect. "I'll go first," Nathan said. "Test it." Maya grabbed his good arm. "You're wounded. Let me." "No, I'm heaviest. If it holds me, it'll hold you." He stepped onto the bridge before she could argue. The ropes creaked under his weight, and the boards shifted beneath his boots. He moved slowly, 1 step at a time, testing each plank before trusting it with his full weight. Halfway across, 40 feet above the gorge, a board broke. His left foot went through, and he dropped to one knee, catching himself on the hand ropes. Pain exploded in his shoulder where the wound opened up again. Blood started flowing fresh and hot. "Grandpa," Kai shouted, forgetting for a moment that Nathan wasn't really his grandfather, just the man who'd saved his family. Nathan pulled his foot free, found solid wood, kept moving. He made it to the far side and turned back, breathing hard. "Send Kai," he called. Maya lifted the boy onto the bridge. "Walk where Nathan walked. Step where he stepped." Kai moved with the careful precision of a child who understood that one mistake meant death. He was halfway across 20 feet from safety when the main rope on the south side gave way with a sound like a gunshot. The bridge lurched sideways. Kai grabbed for the hand rope, his feet scrabbling for purchase on boards that were suddenly vertical instead of horizontal. His right hand caught and held, but his left slipped. He was dangling now, 40 feet above rocks and frozen water, holding on with one small hand that was going numb from cold. Nathan lunged forward onto the bridge. It swayed wildly, the remaining ropes groaning under the stress. He reached out with his good arm, his wounded shoulder screaming protest stretched as far as he could. "Kai, give me your hand." The boy looked up at him, and Nathan saw something in that gaze that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Not fear, acceptance. The boy had already decided he was going to fall. "No," Nathan said. "Not today. Not on my watch. Kick your legs. Swing toward me. On 3. Kai's voice was small but steady. "I can't hold on." "You can. You will. 1, 2, 3. Kai kicked his legs, creating a pendulum motion. Nathan timed it, grabbed for the boy's wrist as he swung close. His fingers closed around Kai's forearm, and he pulled with everything he had left. They both went down on the swaying bridge, Nathan on his back, with Kai on top of him. The bridge was coming apart now, boards falling away into the gorge ropes, fraying. Nathan rolled, pushed Kai ahead of him. "Crawl, fast as you can." They crawled. Behind them, the bridge disintegrated, section by section falling away into the void. They reached solid ground just as the last of the support ropes snapped. The bridge fell tumbling end over end until it crashed on the rocks below. Maya stood on the other side of the gorge, separated from them now by 40 feet of empty air. Nathan could see the calculation in her eyes, could see her trying to figure out if she could jump it, if she could find another way across. "Go back," Nathan shouted. "Follow the ridge north. There's another crossing 3 miles up. What about you? We'll meet you in Denver, at the Tribune office. You've got a copy of the papers. We've got a copy. Even if one of us doesn't make it, the story gets told." Maya stood there for a long moment, and Nathan could see her wrestling with the decision. Finally she nodded. 3 days. If you're not there in 3 days, I'm coming back to find your body. Fair enough. She turned and disappeared into the trees, moving north toward the other crossing. Nathan watched until he couldn't see her anymore, then looked down at Kai. The boy was shaking. Whether from cold or shock or fear, Nathan couldn't tell. Probably all 3. Nathan pulled him close with his good arm. "You did good," Nathan said. "Real good. Your father would be proud." Kai didn't answer, just pressed his face against Nathan's coat and held on like he was afraid of falling again. They rested there for 10 minutes, maybe 15, until Nathan's shoulder stopped bleeding and Kai stopped shaking. Then they stood up and started walking east toward Denver, toward the railroad, toward whatever came next. Behind them the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of orange and red that looked too much like fire, too much like blood, too much like Canyon Creek all over again. But this time, Nathan told himself, this time, we're not running away. This time, we're running towards something. He just hoped they'd get there in time. The frame shifted briefly the way it did when Nathan's memory branched to follow another thread. Thomas could see it in his grandfather's eyes, the way they unfocused, slightly tracking a parallel story. Maya followed the ridge north through darkness and snow. The trail was treacherous, ice-slicked rocks that threatened to send her tumbling into ravines with each step. But she'd walked worse paths, survived worse nights. Her breath came in clouds, her legs burned with cold and exhaustion, but she didn't stop. The second crossing appeared at dawn, a natural stone bridge worn smooth by centuries of water. She tested it carefully, remembering the rope bridge that had nearly killed Nathan and Kai. This one held. She crossed it without hesitation, her mind fixed on one thing: getting to Denver before Blackwood's men found Fletcher. 2 days of hard travel brought her to the city limits. She walked the last 5 miles, her horse having gone lame on the rocky descent. She arrived to find newsboys shouting headlines, people gathering in angry crowds outside the Tribune building, smoke still rising from broken windows. She pushed through the crowd and found Fletcher standing in the doorway, face bruised, shirt torn, but grinning like a man who'd just won a war. "You made it," he said, relief flooding his features. Maya looked at the newspapers clutched in people's hands, the headlines screaming across every page. "So did the story," she replied. "That's all that matters." Fletcher nodded toward the building. "Nathan and Kai are upstairs. Doc says Nathan will live, though he lost a lot of blood. Come on." The reunion was quiet. No tears, no dramatic embraces, just Maya's hand on Nathan's good shoulder, Kai standing between them, and the understanding that they'd all survived what should have killed them. Nathan's voice was weak but steady. "You took your time." "Had to go the long way," Maya said. "Devil's spine doesn't forgive shortcuts." "Neither does truth," Nathan replied, glancing at the newspapers. "But it seems truth won this round." Thomas sat forward in his chair, the firelight reflecting in his wide eyes. His grandfather had gone quiet, lost in a memory that seemed to pull him deeper with each passing moment. The old man stood and walked to the desk, pulled open a drawer that Thomas had never seen him open before. From inside he withdrew a folded newspaper yellowed with age, the edges brittle as autumn leaves. "This," Nathan said, holding the paper up to the light, "is the reason I'm still alive. The reason Kai got to grow up. The reason you're sitting here asking me questions instead of wondering why your family doesn't exist." He unfolded it carefully. The headline screamed across the top in letters 2 inches high. "Canyon Creek Massacre for Profit." Below it a photograph showed General Silas Blackwood shaking hands with a man in an expensive suit, both of them smiling like they'd just closed the deal of the century. "November 17th, 1924, Nathan said. "The Denver Tribune, morning edition, James Fletcher's byline. 5,000 copies printed before Blackwood's men could stop it. By noon it was in 15 states. By evening it was in 30. He set the newspaper down on the desk between them. But getting there, that's where the real story lives. Nathan poured more whiskey, his hand steadier now as if the act of remembering had given him strength instead of taking it away. "I told you about the telegraph post, about sending the warning to Fletcher. What I didn't know was that Blackwood had a man on the line, fellow named Sykes, intercepted every message going through and sent his own." Thomas leaned forward. "So Fletcher went to the wrong place." "Not exactly wrong, just different from what I'd told him. Union Depot instead of the Tribune office. And at Union Depot there were 5 men waiting with guns and instructions to make sure no story ever got printed." The old man's eyes went distant again, seeing something 30 years gone. "But Fletcher wasn't stupid. He was suspicious. And he had help from someone I never expected." The scene shifted, and suddenly Thomas could see it. Not the study, not the fire, but Denver in 1924, cold and gray under a sky that threatened more snow. In Depot sat at the edge of downtown Denver a massive structure of red brick and limestone that handled 100 trains a day. Platform 3 was on the west side exposed to the wind, and that's where James Fletcher stood at 2:30 in the afternoon, scanning the crowd for a man he'd never met. Fletcher was 35 years old, thin as a rail, with ink-stained fingers and eyes that never stopped moving. He'd come from Chicago 6 months earlier, transferred to the Tribune to cover labor disputes and political corruption. He had a reputation for digging where other reporters feared to go. That's why Elias Crow had sent the telegram to him specifically. He held both messages in his hand. The first from the telegraph post told him to meet at the Tribune office. The second, on official letterhead, told him to meet here. The contradiction bothered him, made his reporter's instincts itch. A woman approached from the crowd. She was maybe 45, dressed in a severe gray suit, carrying a briefcase that looked expensive. Her face was pale, drawn, like she hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Fletcher," she said. He turned wary. "Who's asking?" "Evelyn Shaw. We met at the State House last month. I was prosecuting that railway fraud case." Fletcher remembered her. Sharp, precise, the kind of lawyer who built cases like stone walls. "Miss Shaw, what brings you to Union Depot?" She glanced around her eyes, noting the men standing at various points around the platform. Men who were trying too hard to look casual. "The same thing that brought you, a lie wrapped in official paper." She showed him a telegram of her own. "I was told to meet a witness here, federal business. Except there is no witness. There's just you and them." She nodded toward the men. 5 of them positioned to cover all exits. They weren't hiding anymore, not really. One of them, a thick-shouldered man with a scar across his cheek, was staring directly at Fletcher. "Who are they?" Fletcher asked, though he suspected he already knew. "Blackwood's men, private contractors. Not federal agents, despite what their paperwork might say." Shaw's voice dropped lower. "I resigned from his case 3 days ago, when I realized it wasn't about law. It was about erasure." Erasure of what? History, truth, evidence that a decorated general committed murder for railroad money. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a thin folder. "I made copies before I left. Not everything, but enough. Enough to know that you need to leave this depot right now and go somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses." Fletcher took the folder, but didn't open it. "Why are you helping me?" Shaw's face hardened. "Because I swore an oath to uphold justice, not to be an accomplice to mass murder." She glanced at the men again. "They're moving. You need to go. Head for the Tribune office. I'll delay them as long as I can." "How?" She smiled without humor. "I'm still technically a federal prosecutor. I'll threaten them with obstruction. It'll buy you maybe 5 minutes." Fletcher didn't waste time arguing. He turned and walked quickly toward the main terminal, the folder tucked under his coat. Behind him, he heard Shaw's voice, loud and authoritative, demanding to see credentials. The men stopped, confused by her presence, buying Fletcher the seconds he needed to disappear into the crowd. He made it to the street and flagged down a cab. "Blake Street," he said. "The Tribune building. Fast as you can." The driver, an older man with a gray mustache, glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "You running from someone?" "Running toward something," Fletcher said. "Which is more dangerous, I haven't decided yet." Back at Union Depot, Evelyn Shaw held the mercenaries at bay for exactly 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Long enough for Fletcher to disappear into the Denver streets. Long enough for the lie to work. She stood between them and the exit, her federal prosecutor credentials held high, her voice cutting through their confusion like a blade. "You're interfering with a federal witness. Stand down immediately, or I'll have warrants issued within the hour." The men hesitated. They knew she'd resigned, but they weren't sure if she still carried authority. That uncertainty bought precious seconds. The thick-shouldered man with the scar finally pushed past her. "Check with Blackwood," he muttered to the others. By the time they confirmed Shaw no longer had jurisdiction, Fletcher was gone. Shaw didn't wait for their return. She walked directly to the police chief's office and filed a formal complaint about armed men impersonating federal agents at Union Depot. It wouldn't stick. Blackwood's reach was too long, but it created a paper trail evidence that couldn't be burned. By evening, she'd resigned from the Justice Department entirely and booked passage to San Francisco. Some battles, she decided, were better fought outside the system. But before she left Denver, she sent one more telegram. To Nathan Whitecloud, care of Denver Tribune. Message read, "Documentation secured. Copies filed with 3 separate attorneys. They can't erase all of us. Good luck." E.S. Fletcher received it the next morning and showed it to Nathan. The wounded man smiled for the first time since the bridge. "Smart woman," he said. "Blackwood just made himself an enemy who knows how he thinks." The Tribune building was 3 stories of red brick with the newspaper's name carved in stone above the main entrance. Fletcher burst through the doors at 3:15, breathing hard, and nearly collided with the woman coming down the stairs. Maria Santos was 48 years old, 5 feet tall, and ran the Denver Tribune with an iron will that had broken stronger men than Fletcher. She was Portuguese by birth, American by choice, and believed in the power of the printed word the way some people believed in God. "Fletcher," she said, grabbing his arm to steady him. "What's wrong?" "I need the press. Tonight, front page." He pulled out Shaw's folder and the telegrams. "This is bigger than anything we've ever run." Santos took the folder to her office, Fletcher following. She read for 5 minutes without speaking, her face growing harder with each page. When she finished, she looked up at him. "This is a declaration of war," she said. "Against who?" "Everyone. The army. The railroads. Half the politicians in Washington." She tapped the photograph in the folder, the one showing Blackwood with the railroad president. "You can prove all this?" "I can if the witnesses are still alive. Man named Nathan Whitecloud and a woman named Maya Redfeather. They're supposed to be coming here. Have documents, recordings, everything." Santos walked to the window. Outside, the sky was darkening, snow beginning to fall again. "If we print this, they'll come for us. Not with lawyers, with something worse." "I know. People could die." "People already have died. 73 of them 15 years ago, and more since everyone who tried to speak up." Fletcher moved beside her. "This is why we do this job, Maria. This is what journalism is for." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned and headed for the stairs. "Get to the typesetting room. Start laying it out. 3,000 words maximum. I'll get the photographers developing everything in that folder. We go to press at midnight." "What about security?" "I'll call the police chief. He owes me a favor." She paused on the stairs. "And Fletcher, if this goes wrong, if they come for us, before we can print, you make sure those documents survive. Even if we don't." Fletcher nodded and headed for the typesetting room. The next 6 hours would determine whether truth had any power left in the world. Nathan and Kai reached the Tribune building at 6:30 in the evening. They'd made it to the rail line by 4, caught a freight train heading east, and ridden in an empty boxcar with the door open, watching the landscape blur past. Nathan's shoulder had stopped bleeding, but the pain was constant, sharp, and his fever was building. Kai had stayed close the whole journey, quiet but watchful, occasionally checking the bundle of documents tucked inside his coat. The boy had barely spoken since the bridge, and Nathan wondered what scars this day had carved into him, what nightmares would follow him for years. They climbed down from the boxcar at a switching yard 3 blocks from the Tribune building. Nathan stumbled, getting down, his legs weak, and Kai had to help steady him. A railway worker saw them, started to approach, then got a good look at Nathan's bloody shoulder and decided to mind his own business instead. They walked the 3 blocks. To anyone watching, they looked like a wounded veteran and his son refugees from some small disaster. No one stopped them. No one asked questions. In a city like Denver, people had learned not to see things that might require them to get involved. Fletcher met them at the door. He'd been watching for them, checking the street every 10 minutes since Nathan's telegram arrived at the wrong time. "You're Nathan Whitecloud," Nathan nodded, too tired to speak. "Get inside. We've got a doctor coming." Fletcher helped Nathan into the building, Kai following close behind. "Where's the woman Maya?" "Separated," Nathan managed. "Devil's spine. She's coming the long way around. Had her own set of documents." Fletcher led them upstairs to a small office where a cot had been set up. Nathan collapsed onto it, his vision graying at the edges. Kai stood beside him, refusing to leave, small hands gripping Nathan's good hand like it was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. Dr. Raymond Park arrived 20 minutes later. He was Korean, 40 years old, and had been practicing medicine in Denver for a decade, despite the fact that the state medical board refused to license him. He knew more about treating gunshot wounds than most Army surgeons, having learned his craft in ways he never talked about. He examined Nathan's shoulder, his face impassive. "Bullet went clean through. No bone damage, but it's infected. You've been running on borrowed time for hours." "Can you fix it?" Fletcher asked. Park pulled instruments from his bag. "I can keep him alive. Whether he'll be able to use that arm again, that's between him and God." He worked for an hour, cutting away dead tissue, irrigating the wound with iodine, packing it with sulfanilamide powder. Nathan drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of pain, and then not aware of anything, floating in gray spaces between fever dreams and memory. When he woke, it was dark outside, and the building thrummed with activity. He could hear the printing press on the ground floor, a rhythmic thunder that made the walls vibrate. Kai sat in a chair beside the cot, journal open on his lap, helping Fletcher decode the entries. "What time is it?" Nathan asked. Fletcher looked up from his notepad. 9:30. We're laying out the story now. Going to press in 2 hours. Nathan tried to sit up, made it halfway before the room started spinning. Park appeared beside him, pushed him gently back down. "You don't move. You've lost too much blood. You move too much, you open that wound again, and next time I might not be able to stop the bleeding." "I need to testify," Nathan said. "Need to tell them what I saw." "You will, but to me, right here." Fletcher pulled up a chair, his stenographer's notebook, open pencil ready. "Tell me everything. Start with Canyon Creek. February 1909. What happened that night?" Nathan told it. All of it. The approach through the snow, the illuminating shells. His father riding in with warnings. Blackwood shot. The fire. The screaming. The girl he saved who turned out to be Kai's grandmother. His 15 years of running, hiding, carrying guilt like a stone in his chest. Fletcher wrote it all down, his hand moving in rapid shorthand. When Nathan finished, his voice was barely a whisper, throat raw from talking. Fletcher had filled 20 pages. "That's good," Fletcher said. "That's enough for the story, but I need something else. I need the voice." Kai reached into his coat and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in felt, was a wax cylinder, the kind used in Edison phonographs. "My father recorded this," Kai said. "November 1917. He hid the recording equipment in a supply closet. General Blackwood and a man from the railroad, they didn't know they were being recorded." Fletcher took the cylinder like it was made of glass. "Can we play it?" "We need a phonograph," Kai said. Santos appeared in the doorway. "We have one." "In the archives. Come on." They went downstairs, leaving Park with Nathan. The archive room was in the basement, lined with filing cabinets and stacks of old newspapers. In the corner sat a phonograph, an Edison Standard model purchased by the Tribune in 1915 for transcribing interviews. Fletcher carefully placed the cylinder on the mandrel, positioned the reproducer, and wound the crank. The cylinder began to turn. The sound that emerged was scratchy, distant, but clear enough to understand. A voice cultured and cold. "50,000 for the operation. That's the agreed price." Another voice, harder military. "Worth every dead Indian, plus the land rights we discussed." "And Cross, he's becoming problematic." "I'll handle Cross. Same way I handled White Cloud. Some problems solve themselves with a bullet in the right place." Fletcher felt his blood run cold. The voices continued discussing logistics, payments, timelines. 3 minutes of conversation that proved premeditation, conspiracy, murder, for profit. When it ended, the room was silent except for the scratch of the needle on spent wax. Santos spoke first. "We need to make copies, multiple copies. If this is the only one and something happens to it, we have nothing." "I'll handle it," Fletcher said. He carefully removed the cylinder and looked at Kai. "Your father was thorough. He knew this day might come." For the next 90 minutes, while the typesetting room worked on the article, Fletcher used the Tribune's phonograph equipment to create 3 duplicate recordings. The process was painstaking. Each copy required playing the original onto a blank cylinder through an acoustic horn, the sound quality degrading slightly with each generation. The first copy went into the Tribune's fireproof vault, sealed in a metal container with a note, "Evidence, Canyon Creek Massacre. Do not destroy under any circumstances." The second went to Evelyn Shaw's attorney, whose name Santos provided, with instructions to hold it in trust and release it to the press if anything happened to the original witnesses. The third stayed with Kai, wrapped in the same oilcloth that had protected it through 2 states and a dozen near deaths. The boy tucked it back inside his coat without a word. "Now," Fletcher said, holding up the original cylinder with something like reverence, "even if they burn us down tonight, even if Blackwood kills every one of us, the voice survives. Truth has copies now." Santos nodded grimly. "Then let's make sure the paper version survives too. Back to the press." He ran back upstairs to the typesetting room where 4 compositors were assembling the story letter by letter in the metal trays. The headline was already set. "Canyon Creek Massacre for Profit." Below it, in smaller type, evidence ties, "General Blackwood to cover up murder railway conspiracy." The photograph had been developed, enlarged, printed on a metal plate for the press. Blackwood and the railroad president, shaking hands, smiling like they'd just conquered the world. Fletcher read over the compositor's shoulder, checking for errors, making small adjustments. 3,000 words condensed from hours of testimony, years of secrets, lives destroyed, and lives lost. It had to be perfect, it had to be true, because once it hit the streets, there would be no taking it back. At 11:15, a phone call came in. The operator's voice was shaking. "Mr. Fletcher, there's a man on the line. He says if you print that story, the building burns. Everyone in it." Fletcher took the phone. "Who is this?" A voice he didn't recognize. Flat? Professional. "Doesn't matter. You have until midnight to stop the press. After that, we come in." "Come ahead," Fletcher said and hung up. He found Santos in her office. "They're threatening to burn us down." She didn't look surprised. "How many?" "Didn't say, but enough to be confident about it." Santos opened her desk drawer, pulled out a revolver. Her husband's Fletcher knew from when he'd fought in the Revolution. She checked the cylinder, all 6 chambers loaded, and set it on the desk. "Call everyone in the building," she said. "Tell them what's happening. Tell them they can leave if they want. No judgment. But if they stay armed." Fletcher made the calls. 11 people in the building. 8 chose to stay. They armed themselves with whatever they could find. Baseball bats, fire axes, 2 more revolvers from God knows where. Nathan, against Park's protests, struggled out of bed and took position by a second-floor window, his father's Colt in his good hand. Kai they sent to the basement to the archive room with instructions to hide in the old vault if shooting started. The boy went reluctantly, clutching the journal and the remaining documents like they were the most important things in the world, which maybe they were. At 11:45, the first window shattered. Not from gunfire, from a brick wrapped in kerosene-soaked cloth already burning. It hit the floor in the newsroom, and Fletcher stamped it out before the flames could spread. Then the gunfire started. Muzzle flashes in the darkness across the street. Bullets punching through windows, splintering wood, sending everyone diving for cover. The distinctive crack of Winchester rifles, at least 3 of them firing in a coordinated pattern. Nathan returned fire through the broken window one-handed, the Colt bucking in his grip. He couldn't aim worth a damn with his offhand, but the noise was what mattered. Let them know this wouldn't be easy. Santos appeared beside him with her husband's revolver. She fired twice, methodical and calm, like she was target shooting instead of fighting for her life. Fletcher didn't shoot, couldn't bring himself to. Instead, he stayed low and kept working on the story, making final edits, even as bullets flew overhead. The press kept running. That was the important thing. Down on the ground floor, the pressmen had locked themselves in with the machinery and kept feeding paper through. The rhythmic thunder continued each cycle, producing another copy, another piece of evidence that would outlast all of them. At midnight exactly, the front door exploded inward, not from bullets, from a battering ram, the kind used by police for forced entry. 6 men poured through, armed with pistols and shotguns, moving with the practiced efficiency of soldiers. Nathan recognized the leader. Pike Morrison's replacement, a man named Vincent Halford. Halford was a Pinkerton agent, or had been, before they'd fired him for excessive brutality. Now he worked freelance, taking jobs that required a certain moral flexibility. "Federal authority," Halford shouted, though it was obviously a lie. "Cease operations immediately." Santos appeared at the top of the stairs, her revolver pointed down at the intruders. "Show me a warrant." "Don't need one. National security." "Then you don't belong here." She pulled the trigger. The shot went wide, intentionally chipping plaster off the wall near Halford's head. But it made the point. The men scattered for cover, returning fire up the stairwell. The battle lasted 20 minutes. It felt like hours. Bullets and smoke and the constant thunder of the press below, still running, still printing. Nathan fired until his revolver was empty, then reloaded with shaking hands. Santos took a bullet in the shoulder, but kept shooting. Fletcher discovered he could throw things accurately and started hurling paperweights and inkwells at anyone who tried to come up the stairs. Then at 12:20 they heard sirens, not fire trucks, police wagons, lots of them. Halford heard them too. He shouted to his men to pull back, and they retreated through the broken front door, disappearing into the night before the police arrived. Sheriff Crow was the first one through the door, 20 Colorado State militiamen behind him. He'd called in every favor he had activated. Emergency protocols convinced the governor that there was an armed insurrection happening in downtown Denver. He found Fletcher sitting on the stairs covered in plaster dust, grinning like a madman. "Did you print it?" Fletcher nodded. 4,200 copies. Press got damaged in the fight, but we finished the run. Crow looked around at the destruction. Broken windows, bullet holes, blood on the floor. "Was it worth it? Ask me in the morning," Fletcher said, "when people start reading." The sun came up at 6:43 on November 18, 1924. By 7, newsboys were on the corners shouting headlines. By 8, every copy of the Tribune was sold out. By 9, the Associated Press had picked up the story and transmitted it across the country via telegraph wire. By noon, it was being discussed in 30 states. The photograph did most of the work. You couldn't argue with a photograph. There was Blackwood shaking hands with Northern Pacific Railroad President James Hill. The date on the photo, verified by multiple sources, was 4 days before Canyon Creek. The implication was clear. The massacre hadn't been a military necessity. It had been a business transaction. By evening, senators were calling for hearings. Veterans groups were organizing protests. Indigenous leaders were traveling to Washington to demand justice. The story had spread too far too fast for anyone to suppress it. In the Tribune building, Nathan lay on the cot in Fletcher's office, fever finally breaking, and listened to the noise from the street below. People arguing, people demanding answers, people who for the first time in 15 years knew the truth. Kai sat beside him, journal closed now, all its secrets transferred to newsprint. "What happens next?" the boy asked. Nathan didn't have an answer for that, but he remembered something his father used to say. Truth is like water. Robert Whitecloud had told him once. You can dam it for a while, but eventually it finds a way through. What happens next, Nathan said, is that the truth gets to speak. Whether anyone listens, that's up to them. The study was quiet except for the crackling of the fire and the sound of snow against the windows. Thomas had been silent for a long time, processing everything his grandfather had told him. Finally he spoke. "So you went to Washington?" Nathan nodded. December 10, 1924, 3 weeks after the story broke. The Senate Committee on Military Affairs summoned me to testify. Maya had made it to Denver 2 days after the fight. She'd taken the long way around Devil's Spine, arrived to find the city in chaos and the story already spreading. We traveled to Washington together, me, Maya Kai, and Fletcher. He stood, walked to the desk, and pulled out another photograph. This one showed a younger Nathan, maybe 43, sitting in a wheelchair with his arm in a sling. Maya stood behind him, hand on his shoulder. Kai was in the foreground, looking solemn in a borrowed suit. The Capitol building rose white and massive behind them. "That was taken the day before I testified," Nathan said. "Dr. Park said I shouldn't travel, said the infection could kill me, but some things are worth dying for." The journey to Washington had taken 5 days. Denver to Kansas City on the Kansas Pacific Railway, 18 hours, in a car that smelled of coal smoke and unwashed bodies. Kansas City to St. Louis on the Wabash, 12 hours through farmland turning brown with early winter. St. Louis to Washington on the Baltimore and Ohio, 22 hours watching the country roll past in shades of gray and white. Nathan's shoulder throbbed with every mile, every jolt of the tracks. Park had given him laudanum for the pain, but Nathan refused to take it. He needed to stay sharp, needed to remember every detail for when they asked him questions under oath. Along the way, the train picked up passengers, indigenous representatives from the territories traveling to Washington to witness the hearing. Sioux, Cheyenne, Arapaho, people who'd lost family at Canyon Creek or places like it. By the time they reached Washington, There were 30 extra people on the train, all of them carrying stories that needed to be told. There were also attempts to stop them. In St. Louis, 2 men tried to board the train with knives. Maya fought them off with a broken bottle, and the conductor threw the men off at the next stop. In Pittsburgh, someone tried to cut the brake lines. Crow, who'd been traveling with them as protection, caught the saboteur and turned him over to local police. They arrived in Washington on December 9th, exhausted, nervous, and more determined than ever. The hearing room in the Capitol building held 200 people and felt like it held 2,000. Every seat was taken. The gallery was packed. Reporters lined the walls, notebooks ready. It was the biggest story of the year, maybe the decade. The Committee on Military Affairs sat in a semicircle at the front. 12 senators, 6 Republicans, and 6 Democrats, led by Chairman William Morrison of Kansas. Morrison was 60 years old, a progressive who'd made his reputation fighting corruption in the railways. He'd been waiting for a case like this his entire career. General Silas Blackwood sat at a table on the left side of the room, surrounded by 4 attorneys in expensive suits. He wore his dress uniform, every medal polished, every crease perfect. He looked like what he was supposed to be, a hero, a patriot, a man who'd served his country with distinction. Nathan sat at a table on the right, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't fit quite right. Maya sat behind him, Kai beside her. Fletcher was in the gallery still taking notes, even though he'd already filed 3 follow-up stories. Morrison gavelled the hearing to order at 10 in the morning. We're here to investigate allegations regarding the incident at Canyon Creek, Dakota Territory, February 1909. Mr. Whitecloud, you're first to testify. Please stand and be sworn. Nathan stood his shoulder screaming. A clerk approached with a Bible. Morrison began the oath. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Nathan looked at the Bible, looked at Blackwood, looked at Kai. I swear to the dead, he said. They don't lie. Morrison paused, surprised by the deviation from the standard oath, then nodded. That'll do. Please state your name and occupation for the record. Nathan Whitecloud, rancher, former Private 7th Cavalry, 1906 to 1909. Mr. Whitecloud, in your own words, please tell this committee what happened at Canyon Creek. Nathan told it. The same story he'd told Fletcher, but in more detail now. 3 hours of testimony broken only once for lunch. He described the approach through the snow, the orders from Blackwood, his father's desperate ride to warn the village, the shot that killed Robert, the fire, the screaming, the girl he'd saved. He didn't hide his own guilt. I followed orders I knew were wrong, he said. I was a coward. I watched my father die and didn't raise my rifle against the man who killed him. I helped one person escape and abandoned 72 others to burn. That's on me. That'll always be on me. The room was silent when he finished. Morrison cleared his throat. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Whitecloud. I know that wasn't easy. Then came the cross-examination. Blackwood's lead attorney was a man named Thaddeus Crane, 65 years old, with a voice like gravel and a reputation for destroying witnesses. Mr. Whitecloud, Crane said, standing and buttoning his suit jacket, you claim to have witnessed these events 15 years ago. Isn't it true that you deserted your post before the operation concluded? Yes. So you didn't actually see everything that happened. I saw enough. Enough to condemn a decorated general based on 15-year-old memories. Crane picked up a document. According to military records, you were diagnosed with shell shock after the incident. Isn't it possible your recollection is unreliable? Nathan's jaw tightened. My memory is fine. Is it? Or has 15 years of guilt and isolation distorted your perception, made you see villains where there were only soldiers following lawful orders? The order to kill children isn't lawful. Your father, Robert Whitecloud, was he not acting as an insurgent sympathizer when he rode to warn the village? Nathan stood up, ignoring the pain in his shoulder. My father was trying to prevent a massacre. That doesn't make him an insurgent. It makes him the only hero in that valley. Morrison gabbled for order. Mr. Whitecloud, please sit down. Mr. Crane, do you have evidence to present? Or are you simply attacking the witness's character? Crane smiled. No further questions, Mr. Chairman. I believe I've made my point about the reliability of this testimony. Nathan sat back down, breathing hard. Maya leaned forward and whispered, "You did fine. He's trying to rattle you." But Kai was already standing, walking to the front of the room before anyone could stop him. He was 9 years old, small for his age, wearing a suit that someone had altered to fit him. He carried a wooden box under one arm. Morrison looked surprised. "Young man, you're not scheduled to testify." "I have proof," Kai said. His voice was small but clear. "My father recorded it, the general and the railroad man, talking about Canyon Creek, talking about money, talking about killing my father before he could tell anyone." The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, attorneys objecting, Morrison gabbling for order. Through it all, Kai stood calm and still, holding the box. When the noise finally died down, Morrison said, "What's in the box, son?" "A wax cylinder. A recording." Kai looked at Blackwood. "You killed my grandmother. You killed my grandfather. You killed my father. You did it for $50,000. Blackwood's face remained stone, but something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or recognition that this was the moment everything changed. Morrison ordered a phonograph brought in. It took 20 minutes to find one and set it up. During that time, no one spoke. The entire chamber waited in breathless silence. Finally, the phonograph was ready. Fletcher helped Kai place the cylinder on the mandrel. The needle dropped. The room filled with scratchy, distant voices. $50,000 for the operation. That's the agreed price." The chamber recognized Blackwood's voice immediately. The second voice, they would later confirm, belonged to James Hill of Northern Pacific Railroad, dead now for 3 years, but immortalized in wax. The recording played for 3 minutes. 3 minutes that destroyed Blackwood's defense, that proved premeditation and conspiracy, that turned a military operation into a business transaction paid for in blood. When it ended, the silence was absolute. Then the room exploded, senators shouting, reporters rushing for the doors to file their stories, Blackwood's attorneys huddling around him, their faces gray. Morrison gabbled for order, but it took 10 minutes to restore it. When he finally could speak, he looked at Blackwood. "General, do you wish to respond to this evidence?" Blackwood stood slowly. His attorneys were shaking their heads, telling him not to speak, but he ignored them. "Yes, Mr. Chairman, I wish to respond." He walked to the witness table, stood there without sitting, his hands behind his back, in a military parade rest. "What you heard is accurate. The conversation took place, the money was paid, Canyon Creek was cleared to make way for a railway junction." The room erupted again. Morrison gabbled. "General, are you confessing to the crimes alleged?" "I'm stating facts." Blackwood reached into his jacket pocket. His attorneys lunged, thinking he was reaching for a weapon, but he just pulled out an envelope. "But I'm not the only one who knew. I'm not the only one who approved. I have here a memorandum from the Office of the Secretary of War dated February 1st, 1909. It authorizes field commanders to use necessary force to clear indigenous resistance to railway expansion." He held up the document. "It's signed by Secretary of War Taft, approved by President Roosevelt. If I'm guilty, gentlemen, then so are they. So is everyone who's benefited from those railways. So is everyone who rode those trains and never asked what ground they were built on." Morrison's face had gone pale. That document, if authentic, would implicate the highest levels of government. It's authentic. I have others, letters, telegrams, proof that Canyon Creek wasn't an aberration. It was policy, unofficial, unspoken, but policy nonetheless. Blackwood looked around the room. "You want to prosecute me, fine, but you'll have to prosecute everyone, and you won't. Because that would mean admitting that this country was built on exactly the kind of barbarity you're pretending to be shocked by." He set the envelope on Morrison's desk and walked out of the chamber. His attorneys scrambled to follow. The door closed behind them, and the room dissolved into chaos. Morrison called a recess. The committee members huddled in a back room for 2 hours. When they returned, Morrison's face was grim. "This committee," he said, "will issue findings based on the evidence presented. General Blackwood will be stripped of rank and honors. A reparations fund will be established. Canyon Creek will be designated a memorial site." He paused. "However, given the complexity of the evidence and the implications for numerous government officials, we cannot recommend criminal prosecution at this time." Nathan felt Maya's hand on his shoulder, heard her quiet, "No, that's not enough." Morrison continued, "We recognize this is inadequate justice for the victims. But we must balance historical truth with political reality. The general's crimes are now a matter of public record. History will judge him. We can do no more." Nathan stood. "So he walks free, after murdering 73 people, after killing my father. He just walks away." Morrison looked at him with something like pity. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitecloud, but yes." The hearing adjourned. Blackwood left Washington that night. 3 days later, his car was found near the Potomac River, doors open, engine running. No body, no note. Just his medals and his cane on the front seat arranged like a memorial. Some said he drowned. Some said he fled to Mexico. Some said his co-conspirators had him killed to keep him quiet. The truth, like so many truths about Blackwood, disappeared into darkness. The study came back into focus. Thomas realized his grandfather had tears on his face, the first tears he'd seen the old man cry in his entire life. "Did you ever find out what happened to him?" Thomas asked. Nathan wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I saw someone at your great-grandfather Robert's memorial in 1948. Old man, cane, watching from the trees. He was gone before I could get close. Could have been Blackwood. Could have been a ghost. Could have been my imagination." He shrugged. "Doesn't matter anymore. How can you say that he got away with it? Did he—" Nathan walked to the window. Outside, the snow had stopped. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. "He lost everything. His rank, his reputation, his legacy. He died if he died as a criminal and a murderer. That's not getting away with it. That's a different kind of prison." He turned back to Thomas. "In 1926, they dedicated the Canyon Creek Memorial. 700 people came. We read all 73 names aloud. Your father was there. Kai. He was 11 years old. He read his grandmother's name. Little Sparrow. He didn't cry, just read her name clear and strong and let the wind carry it." Nathan picked up the whistle from the desk. "In 1930, when Kai was 15, same age as you are now, he gave a speech at his school about memory, about truth, about how silence is participation and speaking is resistance. The local paper covered it. 3 more states added Canyon Creek to their history curriculum because of that speech." He held out the whistle to Thomas. "This is yours now. 3 generations. Your great-great-grandfather Robert. Me. Now you. You blow it when someone needs warning. You blow it when truth needs speaking. You blow it so the dead aren't forgotten." Thomas took the whistle. It was heavier than it looked, warm from his grandfather's hand. "What do I warn people about? The war's over. Blackwood's gone." "Wars are never over, boy. They just change shape. And men like Blackwood. They're never really gone. They just wear different faces." Nathan sat back down suddenly, looking every one of his 73 years. "You keep that whistle. You remember this story. And when someone tries to bury the truth, when someone tries to make you forget, you blow it loud. You make noise. You refuse to be silent." Thomas nodded, tucked the whistle into his pocket. "Can I read the journal?" "My great-uncle Daniel's journal." Nathan pushed the leather-bound book across the desk. "It's yours, along with all the documents, all the evidence. Your father wanted you to have them when you were old enough. He said every generation needs to know what the last one paid for the truth." Thomas opened the journal carefully. The first page was a letter written in Daniel Cross's precise hand, dated November 1917. "To my son," it read, "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't seek revenge. Seek change. The man who killed me is less important than the system that let him. Build something better. That's how you honor the dead. Thomas read it twice, then looked up at his grandfather. Did we build something better? Nathan thought about that, thought about the years since Canyon Creek, the reforms, the memorials, the history books that finally told the truth, the young people like Thomas who knew the names of the dead and refused to let them be forgotten. We tried, he said finally. That's all any generation can do. Try, fail. Try again. Leave the tools for the next generation to keep trying. Outside, the sun cleared the horizon, washing the snow-covered ranch in golden light. Nathan stood at the window, Thomas beside him. He pointed to the fence post bearing his father's initials. Your great-great-grandfather carved those in 1881, 43 years before Canyon Creek. Nathan's hand rested on Thomas's shoulder. He was building something meant to last. That's what we do. We build. They tear it down. We build again, until finally the thing we build survives us. Thomas gripped the whistle tighter, feeling its weight. I don't know if I'm strong enough. You're not alone, Nathan said simply. Robert, Little Sparrow, Daniel Cross, Elias Grant, Maya, Kai, me. We're all in that whistle, all standing with you. He turned from the window. Now come on. Breakfast is waiting. After, I'll teach you how to blow it so the sound carries. They walked out together, leaving the journal and newspapers on the desk. Evidence of a story that would be told as long as someone was willing to listen. Behind them, the fire burned low embers glowing like memories that refused to die. And if you listened carefully to the wind outside, you could hear it. Not voices exactly, but something close. The sound of those who refused to be forgotten. Someone finally was listening.